All right, everyone. Good afternoon. We are going to get our meeting started. Call to order the meeting of the Homelessness Prevention and Intervention Board for July 8th today, 2026.
All right, looks like we're going to be a light group today. We're going to take a roll call real quick. Joy Andrade,
Here.
Amy Beasley,
Yes, sir.
Amanda Bryant, Ron Delgado,
Here.
Diane Fleet is excused, TC Johnson, Billy Love, Chris Primo is excused, David Shad is excused, Liz Sheehan is excused, Lola Still.
Present.
All right, so unfortunately, we do not have a quorum, so we can go ahead and take any suggested corrections or revisions for the May 13th meeting minutes, but we'll hold the vote of approval of those minutes for a future meeting. Any corrections?
All right, it doesn't look like there are any corrections or comments about the meeting minutes, so we'll move on to public and partner comments for issues on the agenda. All right, well, hearing none, we can move on to our first committee report. That'll be the Data and Systems Integration Committee report, and Adam, I believe, is going to do that report for us.
So the DSI committee met on June 3rd at the Marksbury Family Branch Library. At the time of our meeting, the local COC competition hadn't begun yet, so Jeff ran through some recent updates on the timeline and notified attendees that our office had sent out some correspondence on HMIS items to review if they were potential renewal applicants. This led to some conversation on data collection items like exit destination, prior living situation, and county of origin, which providers expressed interest in trying to optimize such that we might be able to gather additional information on what circumstances might lead a person to engage our system prior to their experience of homelessness. Other new business included a report out on the recently released updates from WellSky to our HMIS platform, the most significant of which were conditional formatting fields within our assessments so that certain questions don't appear until they're prompted by another response, and scoring capabilities for custom assessments directly within HMIS. The most immediate product of the scoring change will be that we can add a scoring component to our local housing triage assessments so that assessors are able to see the score and referral eligibility of their clients immediately upon completing the interview. Providers will remember that with the VI spit at, this is something that we could do within HMIS. We had to make a change when we pivoted to our local triage assessment, so I think we'll be excited to see scoring as an immediate feature within the HMIS platform. At the time of the DSI meeting, development on that feature hadn't begun in earnest, really, so we were surveying service providers in attendance for any preferences or concerns they might have for formatting. I will note right now that these features are included on the live site, but we are in active discussions with the developers and HMIS collaborators at KHC in Louisville to add or make some changes to features related to scoring to make it more intuitive for end users. When those conversations are finalized, our office is going to release official written guidance on scoring within assessments. But for now, we'll just be providing some interim guidance next week at our end user work group. Prior to DSI, WellSky had presented on some upcoming and unreleased features for HMIS, including a new street outreach module. We explored some previews of that feature and discussed current and future opportunities to log contacts with clients for street outreach and support service only providers, potentially utilizing something like the service transaction feature. Our office followed up on some conversations with the providers in attendance and then some agencies supporting similar project types to try to gauge interest in piloting some service contact type features for local reporting and tracking purposes. So If anybody in attendance today has any questions about something like service transactions or like contact tracking outside of enrollments on HMIS, definitely let me know. For HUD updates, our office noted that the director of the SNAPS office was leaving HUD. We noted that that could potentially be an indicator for some further conflict within HUD about changes to data collection, but no further changes to data collection have been mentioned by HUD explicitly as of yet. On housing triage, Marissa discussed some changes to regularly scheduled triage meetings, with providers continuing to take new referrals more slowly due to uncertainty with renewals, and that a full report on coordinated entry from January to June will be included at the next DSI committee meeting. Our next new user training session will take place this Thursday. If you have any users who need access to HMIS, please let me know prior to that session, obviously. And then our next end user work group, like I mentioned, will be next Tuesday. That session will focus on new coordinated entry features and probably a spotlight on service transactions if we have time. Next DSI meeting will be August 5th, 2026, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, if there's no questions, then we will have Amy next with the Program Performance and Evaluation Committee report.
Thank you. We met on June 17th at Bluegrass Care Navigators on Harrodsburg Road. We started our meeting at 1:32. We heard from the Independence Place about their intensive case management supportive services. They saw an increase of 83 persons from FY25. 75% of the persons that they helped have multiple disabilities, and 57% of the persons helped exited to permanent housing. The challenges that they face seem to be the same with everyone else: the lack of affordable housing, the 2 to 3 times monthly rent, and moving the senior age from 55 to 62 for lots of places. And the OVR office has all but closed. Also presents a challenge to some of their participants. KY 502 grant, the COC planning grant. This grant funds 1.5 positions in our OHPI office. They work extremely close with our partner agencies to make sure that they're in compliance. They do the Lex count point in time count. The services they provide are crucial to some of our partner agencies, and they do a fantastic job. Lex Housing Authority, they are struggling getting landlords to take their vouchers, and the vouchers being enough. A 3-bedroom unit voucher is $743, while the market rate's about $1,500. It's probably actually more than that. The Salvation Army is under new management. Women and Women with Children Shelter, they have 18 transitional housing units that are all full. Single families are in dorm-style housing. They're building an on-site veterans housing. 96% of their clients receive case management. 18% exited to permanent housing. 7% return to homelessness. The big thing with the Salvation Army is they have removed 90% of their ban list clients, and currently only have 8 on the ban list for violent rule violations. They've restructured the drug policy and a new partnership with targeted case management so they can help stop overpromising on some results. The meeting concluded at 3 p.m. The next meeting date is August the 19th, 1:30 at the Bluegrass Care Navigators on Harrodsburg Road. Thank you.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Amy about that report? If not, we will move on to Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee report. I believe David is on vacation, so Marissa is going to be reporting on that committee.
Yes, I am. So the Advocacy Issues and Programs Committee met on June 24th, 2026 at 1:30 at the Don Ball Campus Center. We approved our meeting minutes from April, and our new business consisted of updates from the mayor's task force. The task force is moving forward towards consensus on targeting recommendations, focusing on underserved groups. as well as aiming to finalize those recommendations in the fall to coincide with local funding availability and planning efforts. Those recommendations focus on families, seniors, and persons with disabilities. This targeted group is based upon data supporting the unmet need for those experiencing homelessness here within Lexington, and is backed by our data sets, including the Lex count, which shows the fastest growing subpopulation is 65 and older. This data also is reflective of our emergency shelter data as well, and the need for shelter accommodations, especially for those who have disabilities. We also discussed the fiscal year 2026 Continuum of Care NOFO. The COC competition is now open. Those applications are going to be due in 1 week on July 15th at 3 p.m. and that is through our submittal portal here before end of day. The entire Continuum will be receiving a reminder about that due date along with all the necessary links, including to the submittal portal. We discussed 2 Continuum of Care wide agreements to make our collaborative application a little bit more competitive, especially with the shifting changes with this current administration and it being reflected in the NOFO. Those 2 are a supportive service requirement agreement as well as a harm reduction agreement. We will be letting the entire Continuum of Care know when those agreements have been drafted for review because it will be affecting all of our Continuum of Care projects. It is part of the new thresholds that are already within the NOFO. So any new project applications or renewal project applications are already interfacing with those types of agreements and requirements. Finally, for new business, we received updates from HUD concerning chronic homelessness. Essentially, HUD removed the chronic homeless requirement as a part of permanent supportive housing requirements. This offers flexibility, which is great, but would require a policy update for our local coordinated entry policies. We review those policies in our Data and Systems Integration Committee meeting. So those policies are currently, in that update is currently being drafted. That way it can be a part of our next DSI committee and for review and then hopefully come to the board. For continuing business, we received no updates concerning the 1915I rise. However, multiple agencies indicated that they were working on the application process, which is great. We know that it can be a lengthy process, so we really applaud those agencies. And lastly, the committee discussed the Housing Flex Fund, with the fund reopening with policy changes to balance prevention and moving to rapid rehousing funding. And our next meeting for advocacy is going to be August 26th, 1:30 at the Don Ball Campus Center. And I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns that folks may have.
All right, thank you, Marissa. We will move on then to encampment SOPs and review report, and Jeff is going to give that report since Steve is out.
So before we get into the report, I will say that we actually will be bringing an SOP update, hopefully, to the next meeting. We have made some changes internally within LFUCG. Previously, all of the public property encampment removals were facilitated through environmental services. And we would coordinate with them when we were ready for a camp to be removed, and they would work with their contractors. We have moved that money internally to now sit within code enforcement. That seemed to make more sense for LFUCG, given that both code enforcement and OHPI are under the same department, Housing Advocacy and Community Development, but also we share an office space. So this creates a lot more continuity and just gives us full control over the process. We don't have to be as concerned about things like if environmental services is remembering to schedule things to be in compliance with our notices and making sure that they don't schedule them early just because they already have a contractor that might be in the area. So we are excited about that change, and we'll be updating the policies to reflect that change in the addition of the encampment coordinator position. Moving into the July report, this time of year is always going to have a little bit more removals for us. We start to see a lot of the things that kind of went unnoticed or unattended over the winter months. And as environmental services has more time, I guess now contractors that code enforcement uses have more time, we begin to work on some of those items. So the first location in your packet is going to be state right-of-way, approximate address of 900 Nandino Boulevard. There were 5 individuals that were on site when OHBI was notified by police of a camp on April 22nd. Contact was made with a couple of those individuals later in the week. A couple of the individuals were not present. Outreach continued to make several visits. All the residents that they were able to make contact with had declined services and expressed intent to relocate voluntarily. We continued to work that camp for another week with no contacts made, while environmental services worked to obtain bids. The following week, there was still no sign of activity. It does appear that the residents had relocated. Still, there was initial notice posted on May 7th and a final notice on May 8th that went ahead and communicated the final removal date of May 14th. That camp was cleaned and removed at a cost of $5,170.47. Steve has started to include photos of some of the encampment removals just to help people understand. I know in the past we've had some questions about what types of items that we might find left behind, what kinds of things factor into the level of cost that we incur. So we just view this as a tool that's helpful to better educate the board membership. And you can definitely see by the time that we went to remove that camp, we were really just looking at a lot of trash and debris left behind. The second location is going to be approximate address of 1502 Roanoke. We were notified by environmental services of a camp at this location. Contact was made with one individual on date of notification of April 17th. Services were declined and the individual expressed intent to relocate voluntarily. Multiple visits made the following week. The individual was still there but continued to decline services. The week of May 4th, when visits continued, the camp appeared to be abandoned with no personal belongings present. Environmental Services was notified to proceed with removal. Since there was no active encampment, we did not post notice for this location. It was cleaned and removed also on May 14th at a cost of $700. As you can tell with that lower price point, we're looking at significantly less debris and much more gathered in one location. For the third location, this was approximate address of 2180 Call Drive. This is going to be the Elkhorn Road area. On February 6th, we had been notified by police of an individual that was camping in the area. They'd actually established multiple different camps and kind of bounced around from a few different locations in the area. Police have been getting a high number of calls about the issue due to some pretty significant litter issues. We continued to work with police throughout February and early March to locate the individual. With the kind of movement from place to place, it was a little bit challenging. In April, police unfortunately had to cite the individual for unlawful camping. We did start to see some progress, though, in building rapport. The week of April 13th, police attended our cross-functional team meeting to present this case and help bring some of our partners into some additional service interventions. And we made contact with the individual in late April. He was agreeable to service connection. We scheduled additional service for the following week between the staff at New Beginnings and Recovery Cafe. The individual agreed to go into residential substance use treatment, and New Beginnings made a commitment to work with them on permanent housing following that treatment. A bed was located with Yonder Behavioral Health and Berea, and transportation was provided. Initial notice went up that week as the resident took their desired belongings with them when they headed to treatment. We confirmed the following week that there were no additional signs of activity. Initial notice was posted on May 8th with a final notice on May 20th. That was cleaned and removed on June 5th at a cost of $300. Location 4 is an emphasis area. This is going to be the Nicholas Park overpass at Man of War, just across from Lowe's. We had a routine check of the emphasis area on the week of April 13th, in which Street Outreach made contact with 2 individuals. They initially declined services. We did make several additional attempts that week. The following week, no contacts were made. Same the following week after that. On May 4th, a new camp was identified and contact was made with one of the 2 original residents. Services were still declined. The week of May 11th, we continued efforts. We had one of the original residents and a new resident, making a total so far of 3 unique individuals. Outreach provided individuals with supplies like backpacks and water. The new residents communicated some health problems that we facilitated contact with community paramedicine. OHPI and Outreach attempted to make contact with friends and family of the residents to explore any housing options that we could facilitate. We also had Outreach assist them with obtaining ID. The following week, I received a call from the fire department. They had been out to extinguish a large fire in the area. They wanted to communicate that they did not have a choice, but they ended up having to spray water on some of the personal items that were at the camp due to the fire. From there, we did not see additional activity. The only items that were left behind were burnt debris from the fire. We moved forward with posting an initial notice on May 19th. As we continued to see no activity, we went forward with a removal on May 27th, cost of $420. As you can see, especially towards kind of the back of that first photo, a lot of black and charred kind of items in the pile of debris. Location 5 is approximate address 720 De Road. On May 7th, we were notified by a city contractor of a camp on the property. Contact was made with one individual at the initial site visit. The resident was already packing up belongings and declined to provide any information or declined services. On May 8th, another visit to the camp confirmed that the resident had relocated. An initial notice was posted. The week of May 11th, the camp continued to appear abandoned, and we worked to obtain bids. The following week, final notice was posted with a removal occurring on May 23rd, a cost of $1,949.98. Even though we did not find personal belongings, you will see a lot of more bulky items left behind, which factored into that increased cost. So for the 5 unique locations that were cleared during this period, we had a total cost of $8,540.45. That gave an average cost per cleanup of just over $1,700. But since we did have some outliers, we also provided you with a median cost, and that was closer to $700. We had 2 locations where we had individuals that accepted services, and a total of 11 persons that we made contact with. 3 individuals from those 11 did engage in some level of service. That's going to bring our cost for the fiscal year to about $82,684. Part of this is probably going to be also reflective of having a team member that's in the field and better able to obtain information across different divisions. Average cleanup cost is kind of similar to what we've seen in the past, around $2,200 with a median of $1,350. Any questions regarding the encampment report?
All right, if there are no questions, we'll move on to the OHPI Director's Report with Jeff.
All right. So we are right past our fiscal year end. My hope is that all of the numbers here are 100% accurate. There was a period of time that I did not have access to our financial system. We also are going to see fiscal year 25 funds eventually moved with a budget amendment to the current year. All of that should have already occurred except for some funds that had been allocated for a second term of the landlord partnership program with Lexington Housing Authority. They had a end date of June 30th, extended from their initial term. We did not hear from them until recently that they had an interest in potentially pursuing a renewal of that. At this time, it does not look like we're going to move forward with a renewal. So we will have that $300,000 that was allocated for that program to redirect to other needs. Everything else should be preparing to close out that was established on fiscal year 25, including purchase orders that were related to the open application for program funding. A couple of those, Community Action Council, Greenhouse 17, and Arbor Youth did recently have amendments approved by council to extend that period of performance and expect to close out by fall. The first annual term of the Housing Flex Fund, we are catching up on invoicing, and we have now rolled over onto the second term. At the time that I released this, I was not certain whether or not there would be a renewal with Lexington Housing Authority. So the funds that are remaining unallocated for fiscal year 25 would be the $147,526 plus the $300,000. So that would be $447,000. For fiscal year 26, this would be the fiscal year that LFUCG just closed out. We are moving into the end of the current street outreach agreement that will end on July 31st. We are also moving into the third term with Independence Place, now going by Center for Accessible Living for their intensive case management program. Highlighted again, you will find the funds allocated for a third term of the landlord partnership program with Lexington Housing Authority. That can now be added to the unallocated funds for the year. We just launched the second annual term for the Housing Flex Fund. Applications can be submitted to both Arbor and Community Action Council. We also had approved financial assistance for winter shelter participants to facilitate movement to permanent housing, as well as dedicated funds for the elderly disabled winter shelter program and the family winter shelter program for the 25-26 calendar year. Both of those projects have closed operations. Bluegrass Care Navigators has invoiced all of their expenses, and I just received the final invoice for Community Action Council and expect to have that closed out by the next board meeting. We also were able to close out the funds that were awarded to Greenhouse 17 for emergency repairs. We had a slightly higher amount appear here for allocation in fiscal year 26. That's reflective of the budget amendment that moved unspent funds from previous years into 26. Our base amount for that year had been about 1.6 million. Then we have unallocated funds of $521,295, and we can now add to that $300,000 from the funds allocated for the landlord partnership program. For fiscal year 27, you're going to see very little established here. We have not really moved forward in releasing RFPs for any significant amount of funding as the Task Force for Homelessness continues its recommendations. We want to make sure that we would have resources for implementation. So right now we have only funded a few things for the current fiscal year. That would include the match that was committed for our COC planning grant. We are in the process of making payment for HMIS subsidy. We're going to continue to provide those user licenses to incentivize participation in the system. We recently rebid street outreach, and that was awarded to the Hope Center. They will continue to operate a larger team Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., and then 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. That program had been expanded in the fall of 25 to help provide additional support in the downtown area. They're going to continue a location-based approach, and we'll be adding some additional clinical supports leveraged through PATH and opioid abatement funding. We previously had agreed to commit some funding to help Arbor Youth with installation of a fire sprinkler system, which would also increase their bed capacity. That work is expected to begin soon. Just attended a meeting with the grants team and Arbor yesterday, just to make sure that they have all the information needed for the grant portion of funding to be in compliance with things like Build America, Buy America. And then we also have that should say year 3 for the Housing Flex Fund. My apologies on that typo. We had initially funded that for 3 annual terms with automatic renewal. So at present, we are looking at approximately $658,000 on the current fiscal year that is unallocated, and I will begin movement on a budget amendment to move all previous year funding forward. So that number is going to increase by the next time that it's presented here. Though it is from the general fund and not board-controlled funds, we also had $2 million that was committed for winter shelter purposes from the general fund in this year's budget. We have an active RFP on Ion Wave now for parties that would be interested in potentially submitting an application for operation of this year's winter shelter planned for the Versailles Road campus that we operated on last year. Any questions about the budget update? Hearing nothing from our robust audience, I'm going to go ahead and move into Continuum of Care program updates. Marissa may have touched on this in her earlier report out, but we have now seen the release of the NOFO, and we have opened the local competition process. We held a webinar in June to go ahead and provide additional guidance to new and returning applicants on what to expect from this year's NOFO and general requirements of the program. We saw pretty good attendance for that webinar, are excited to potentially see some new applications this year. Will say that HUD has not placed a formal cap on the amount of our funding that can go towards permanent housing projects. However, they have limited Tier 1 funding to 60%. That is incredibly low. It's not as low as the proposed fiscal year 25 NOFO. However, it is still significantly lower than an average year. Typically, we see that somewhere between 85 to about 98% of our ARD being put into Tier 1. So this means that we really don't have a guarantee for projects that are placed in Tier 2 that they will be funded. Effectively, this is HUD's strategy to shrink the amount of permanent housing projects that we include. They're not putting a cap, but they are effectively limiting the amount of funds that will go to permanent housing by placing this cap and also carving out a portion of the Tier 2 funding that is going to be used exclusively for transitional housing and supportive service only projects. So a lot of our efforts to recruit new applicants this year have been around trying to shift some of our COC funds to supportive service and transitional housing projects so that we can still offer as many resources as possible and try to prevent people from being displaced and try to use this as a source that we can fund some services and potentially try to move some of our local dollars to more housing assistance. At the present time, the local competition deadline is scheduled for July 15th. As Marissa said, she'll send out a reminder. HUD has yet to do two essential things for the competition. That is releasing the annual renewal demand report. That report specifies the amount of funding that we are eligible to apply for as a continuum, inclusive of things like COC bonus funding. So we may have some potential changes to our timeline in terms of when we can notify applicants. We unfortunately have to have those numbers in order to properly calculate our priority listing. We'll communicate with that as needed. Additionally, HUD has still not opened the eSNAP system where applications are submitted. So this year, we are thankful that we anticipated that, and we went ahead and drafted application forms that were based on the standard application that we typically see year after year. Until the time that HUD opens eSNAPs, we won't be certain if they make any changes to the application, as they've also not released detailed project application instructions. However, this does give our providers an ability to go ahead outside of eSNAPs and begin authoring their applications so that hopefully when eSNAPs open, it's as simple as doing a lot of copying and pasting to move items into eSNAPs. We have a special board meeting planned for 1 p.m. immediately prior to the next Data Systems Integration Committee on August 5th. I should have already sent out a notification to our board about that date, but I will send a reminder just because it's important that we have a quorum to be able to approve both our collaborative application and our priority listing. Any questions right now on the COC program? All right, hearing none. Marissa already touched on several updates related to the Mayor's Task Force on Homelessness. I won't reiterate everything that she covered, but there were a few things that I did want to point out for our membership. First, the normally scheduled meeting for the task force would have fallen immediately after this meeting at 3:30 in this room. Due to several people being out for other events going on this week, we have moved the July meeting to July 29th. It will remain at 3:30 p.m. and it will still be here in the third floor conference room of the Phoenix building. Between now and then, committees are continuing to work on refining the recommendations that were presented in the June meeting. We have a task force chair meeting that is going to occur tomorrow to complete some of that work. We will also have a event planned for Tuesday, August 11th at 7 p.m. at the Lexington Senior Center on Life Lane. That meeting is intended for us to present draft recommendations to the general public and solicit any feedback. As you might recall, the Community Engagement Subcommittee had done a lot of work to engage different groups for input while we worked to form recommendations. And this is a follow-up to that to kind of share what we have drafted and get any additional feedback that's needed before final recommendations would be presented to the task force. The August meeting is also adjusted. It will take place on Wednesday, August 26th at 3:30, and that occurrence will be held in the council chambers. Our hope is that the task force process will come to a close in September, which would then allow us to also go into the October fund balance conversation. Generally, each year in the fall, the city would take a look at the budget and any funds that have become available because of projects that maybe didn't come to fruition or were underspent. So it's good timing in terms of being able to potentially lobby for some of those funds to be applied towards recommendations that we seek to implement. Any questions related to the mayor's task force updates?
All right, quiet group today. Well, if there's no other questions, our next regular meeting is September 9th from 1:30 to 3:30 in this location, 101 East Vine, Phoenix Building, third floor conference room. Are there any other issues or public sharing for issues that are not on the agenda? Do we need a motion to adjourn since we don't have a? So does it really matter? Okay.
Usually nobody objects.
Yeah, usually not. All right, well, hearing none, we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Since we wrapped a little bit early, if anybody that did attend has any need to connect with us, we can be around for a minute.
Also, I know it's a small group, so we may remember everybody that was here, but please go ahead and sign in anyways, just in case.